My name is Monk Rowe, and we are filming in New York for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive. I'm quite pleased to have Maria Schneider with me this afternoon. And I know you have been working both ends of your life quite busy the last few days.
Yeah, with the performance of my orchestra and panels, and then just seeing everybody that you've ever met in school or working overseas or in the States and from schools and things. So it's pretty crazy here.
This Jazz Educators Conference is pretty astounding, actually, when you think of how far it's come in the last few years.
Yeah, it's gotten bigger and bigger. I just noticed the catalog gets thicker, you know.
You're one of the few people I talked to who really went all the way through with your education in music, from through graduate work. And I'm not sure how to ask this question, but I'll try. In your writing, how much of it is attributable to your education, and how much of it is inherent in you?
That's an interesting question. I think the biggest thing that school gives you, or gave me, I'll talk about me, the biggest thing that school gave me was an opportunity to focus on my music without the distractions of the other things in life. You know, this concentration of going to classes, and just your mind is always in that period of your life where I think those are really big years, you know, when you're from 18 to maybe 24, 25, you can really absorb a lot of information, and I think the biggest thing was just the concentration of thinking about music all the time, because I was in school, and being around other musicians and having ensembles available to write for. I think that was the most important part of it. I think that the most important teachers I had were teachers that guided but didn't tell me what to do. And, you know, as far as jazz composition goes, when I did my undergrad at the University of Minnesota, there was no jazz program at that school. I also didn't have a jazz high school band or anything like that. I grew up a matter of fact, I'm from Minnesota, a very small town, and there was only one person in Windham that really knew anything about jazz, but she was an extraordinary stride player. This is kind of going off your question, but it kind of leads up, because my education really started with her. And as I was learning classical pieces, she taught me how to play in this old stride style. So we were learning standards, and I would come up with my own piano arrangements of them, basically with a little bit of improvisation. And I learned to play out of a fake book. The thing is, she didn't tell me anything about the development of jazz. So by the time, and there was no record store. The only records I had were old Ellington records from the 30s, Teddy Wilson, Artie Shaw. I didn't have any modern jazz records. So, and public TV and public radio wasn't so big back then. I had a lot of classical music, but I was really, I always felt sad, because I felt that I grew up in the wrong era, that if I had grown up when Mrs. Butler did, because she had come from Chicago, and she only moved to Windham because her son and her husband had both died within a month of each other. Her only family left was in Windham, so that's the only reason there was this genius personality in Windham. But I thought that jazz had died, and I felt really sad that I grew up in the wrong era, because I wanted to be part of that. So by the time I went to college for music, I thought, well, maybe I'll study composition. But I felt weird in the classical world, because the classical world in the universities, especially, even more so at that time, tonality was something that, you know, if you wrote something that was tonal, you were just shunned.
Is that right?
Oh,
that's really weird.
It's absolutely true. And I remember I wrote a piece for two pianos that was on a sort of a composer forum concert at the school or whatever. And I remember people looking at each other, because everybody was writing sort of atonal music, and this thing was very tonal and romantic. And I remember seeing two older composers looking at each other and giggling. And I remember feeling, I just don't have a place in this world, in this music. And then I went to, two things happened at once. I went to a Bob Hope show, of all things, and they were backed up by a big band from the college. This is right when I started school, and I said, oh my God, there's a big band, and I saw this kid playing drums and people improvising a little bit, and I was like, oh my God, I had no idea this sort of thing existed. And then this guy who lived in the dorm down the hall from me, he heard me playing some old Ellington album, and he said, do you like jazz? And I said, yeah, you know what that is? And he said, well, as it turned out, I didn't know what it was. He knew what it was. He brought me all these records. He brought me Herbie Hancock Headhunters. He brought me Coltrane, McCoy Tyner. I'd never heard a piano player play without a root before. So suddenly I heard all this modern jazz, and I tell you, I was like in tears, because it was like, oh my God, the dream came true that this music had evolved and I could be part of it. And so immediately I just started trying to absorb everything I could. And I got through with that classical degree as quickly as I could, so that my last year of school, all I did was work on my own study. I studied with Manfredo Fest, who was a Brazilian pianist that lived in Minneapolis. He was blind, but he taught me all our lessons. We just transcribed Bill Evans by ear, and it was amazing. And then I tried to write a few things for the big band, and I learned on my own. And I learned from friends that I was in school with that were playing. There was a guy named Dave Sletton, who sadly just died, a young guy. But he and I would get together, and we'd go to our Manfredo lessons together and listen to each other's lessons. And it was, but that was more you know, so you could say, okay, I came through a college, but my education in jazz came from this support of friends and just out of a love of music and listening to things all the time. I heard this record. Did you hear that? I transcribed this. Let me share it with you. That was the value of school. And then when I wanted to go on and study further, then I applied to go to Eastman for grad school. And Rayburn Wright, who also has since passed away, sadly, he wrote me a letter back, and he said, Maria, he said, we can't accept you. You don't, he said, but I really feel like you have talent. He said, I really recognize that, but you don't have any experience. So why don't you come out to our summer session? At that time, they had this big arrangers holiday, which was quite famous at the time, and arrangers came from all over the country. They put together a big band, studio orchestra, and you wrote your ass off for 3 weeks, and then they would play your music and critique it. So I worked my butt off to impress Ray and to learn, you know, and I wrote my first studio orchestra piece, and I quickly caught up. And I hadn't gotten into Eastman, but I went to University of Miami for a semester. And was around all these students that were doing so many modern things, and they were so great, and the band was so fantastic, and you know, they played my music, they recorded a couple things. I mean, I was just like, I went from like here to here, you know, overnight, and then Eastman then allowed me to get in, and I wanted to go to Eastman because they had people like Bill Dobbins, who really taught jazz from the historical point of view, and I was missing everything from swing until, you know, today. And I really needed the roots of things. And so Bill Dobbins, you know, we'd go through Charlie Parker solos note for note and analyze everything, and I needed that because I was missing a lot. But as far as my own voice, I found that. Nobody helped me with that.
You're really self-motivated.
Self-motivated. And also, because I didn't have anybody really over my shoulder in those beginning stages where I was experimenting, I came up with my own unorthodox ways of doing things that I never dropped. And I remember Rayburn Wright in class, he used to pull out my things as an example and say, Maria broke every rule I taught you last week here, but it works, and this is why. And so that was nice. You know, not always was it good, but every once in a while he would say that, and I appreciated that he recognized that and allowed me to grow in those kind of unorthodox ways.
Wow. Did you have a supportive family in this kind of decision?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank God. I remember hearing my parents argue one night that my father's more practical than it's hard to say, but my mother really supported us in the arts. When I had two sisters, one is a painter, now she's an architect. The other one did a lot of Shakespearean acting and writing. Now she became a lawyer. Everybody became slightly more practical. and I did music, and I remember my father at one point just panicked that his daughters were theater, art, and music, and it's your fault. You are the one who bought them all the books and the records and the paintings, you know, or whatever. But they're always supportive, and you know, they don't always understand everything I do. Sometimes my mother says, "I want to hear something I can sing in the shower," you know, and but they were supportive.
Right. Wow. That was a great answer, actually.
Well, long you see, that's what I mean. You just can't shut me up once you so.
Well, when you get a commission to write, I was going to skip to this question because after hearing some of your work the other night, I'm wondering if you get a commission to write something, do people usually give you guidelines like, we are looking for this kind of thing? And if they don't, where does your initial inspiration come from?
Okay, well, the first thing is, actually, I don't like getting commissions. I know every composer likes commissions, and because it means you're being paid to write. But I put myself through a psychological trip a little bit when I get a commission. Luckily, people don't say to me, I'd like you to do something that's kind of this or that. If they do, forget it. It's over. I can't, you know. I have had people commission me to write an arrangement of something. For instance, Love Theme from Spartacus, the Danish Radio Orchestra, he came to me. But then he didn't tell me how to do it. I knew I was doing that piece for Toots Thielemans. So I took the elements of that song that I loved and I developed them, and the elements of that song which I didn't love, I skirted my way around, you know. But so generally, you know, the thing that I have a problem with is if somebody comes to me and says, I want a drum feature for me, or I want a piece that features me on flugelhorn. I'm not the kind of writer who can look at a player and say, this person technically can do this and this and this, and I want to showcase it. For me, music is something that has to be really personal. I have to go back into childhood memories, kind of feelings. I have to really transport myself into an experience to feel motivated to write. Because when I was a child and doing music, I didn't learn music because because I was in school and thought music would be an interesting thing to do, or somebody pushed me to do it. My early motivation to do music all came from me. You know, when that woman, Mrs. Butler, moved to Wyndham, I was 5 years old, and my parents invited her to come up to our house for dinner, and after dinner, she sat down at the piano and played. And I remember she played like this classical thing, actually something I'd recognized from my mother's records. And then she started playing stride jazz, and I immediately could feel that there was something in that wasn't the same as the other thing. I remember recognizing somehow the difference between pop and classical at that moment. But the personality that came through her, she had red hair, she was flamboyant, she was eccentric, she wore bright green muumuus and purple slippers, and you know, she was just intense, and the intensity came through the music. She was like Dorothy Donegan, and when she would play, she'd be laughing and accidentally go off the end of the piano, almost Victor Borge style. But such technique, but soul, you know? And that thing for me was just so incredibly important in the music. And so when I went into my own music and I started playing, for me it was like fantasy. You know, I would play something and I would shut my eyes. I could play for hours. And I used to fantasize when I'd play piano. I'd fantasize that there were talent scouts from cars that would drive past Wyndham, because Wyndham was in the sticks. It was nowhere. And my dream was like to go to New York someday, even though I had no idea what New York was, you know. Maybe I psychically kind of knew what might come someday. So I used to fantasize that there were talent scouts and cars that had machinery that could hear inside of homes and that they were listening to me. So I was always full of fantasy in my music. And you know, when you're a child, you experience disappointment for the first time, sadness, romantic love maybe, intensity, fear. All the emotions you have are the most intense in your childhood because that's the first experience you have. so many things touch you then. So I always go back to that. Sometimes I'm inspired by a painting, the textures, the colors, the lines that touch me somewhere. You know, music is, for me, it's the beauty in music is not necessarily music. It's the thing that music for me is like a sound manifestation of something much deeper. Or it's I'm trying to get some feeling inside me out, or some kind of experience, or some kind of vibration, something, and codify it in sound to transport other people to that same place. So I'm not just trying to create interesting sound, I'm trying to transport an experience through music.
I can hear it when you
Oh,
in your
that's
pieces, you know. And I was interested to hear the other night that your pieces don't seem to usually start with one groove and keep it all the way. That they have sections, and things happen to the time, and things happen to the emotion within them.
Yeah, you know, it's something I started to realize about jazz, because I have to say I'm really disappointed in a lot of jazz I hear. Not that I listen and say I'm disappointed, but I just lose interest pretty quickly. And I think that, you know, jazz at one time was music that it just evolved. Later it was named jazz, and then everybody goes back and analyzes how it came into being or whatever. But it was something that came up spontaneously from something very deep and cultural and human and personal and, you know, sociological. Everything came together. And, you know, for me, you know, now what happens is when people are, say, they're writing music, they have this template of how music has been behind them, you know, like, okay, it's jazz. That means has rhythm section, probably drum set. It means that there's a bass line. It means that there's something comping. It means that there's a solo section. It means that there's a tune, and then that tune is going to be used for improvisation, and then there's going to be a development. And without even thinking about it, when you sit down to compose, it's very easy to have this grid. Boom, it's planted in the back of your head, and then you end up, okay, maybe you fill in the blanks with a different melody, a different set of chord changes that are slightly different, a few little innovations, but it's still stuck in this grid that, you know, it's like you have in the back of your head. And so for me, what I try to do is make my music about experience and throw away that grid. And what I try to do is say, okay, I have this orchestra. This is a chamber group. In this group, I have 13 wind instruments. And I have much more, because each of the saxophone players can play flute. They can play clarinet. Now I have a guy who can play oboe and English horn. I have all these mutes available for trombones. I have all these flugel and mutes available for the trumpet. I have lots of different ways of playing the piano that could be available. The strings, everything. The bass can be arco, it can be pizzicato. The drummer can be more like a percussion player. I have the element of space, you know. I can use just a piano and a flute. I don't have to use the whole band, saxes versus the trumpets, and do it in this same way. And so if you can just release yourself, and the beauty of having a jazz group is that you have all these people that understand this art of improvisation and have a basis and a history to put that language into something logical, but they're all open-minded enough to not necessarily do that in a style that comes from the 1940s or 30s or whatever, but they all, you know, Scott Robinson, he's into C melody saxophone, and he's into all sorts of old style things, but he also loves Sun Ra, and he has such a wide world that's coming, you know, and then I have that coming through all the different musicians. So I try to just open myself up and say, I want to create something unlabeled, you know, no grid, no styles, no nothing coming through me. Of course, you can't avoid it. I've listened to a lot of Gil Evans, I've listened to a lot of Ravel, I've listened to a lot of Brookmeyer. All those things are here, but try to really be conscious of getting rid of this thing, you know. And the score paper with 8 bars.
Yes.
I never write with barred paper. I put up a huge piece of score paper with 1,000 tiny staves with no bar lines. And I even try to get away from looking at the stave. I stand up and I dance and I move around and I sing, and sometimes I'll run a tape recorder while I'm doing it. And then I go to the piano and I try to figure out what the hell I'm doing. Because the minute I'm thinking about music, it becomes music. I want the music to be that other thing. And then I codify it in notes, in little black dots and lines, you know, to try to translate it. Does it make sense?
It does. It's wonderful to hear. It's
Yeah.
really innovative, I think. I know what you mean, like, you know, you get used to putting a shout chorus 3/4 of the way through, and you know,
Oh, yeah,
what's
it's-
going to happen at the solo, put a background after the solo.
Or that there even is a shout chorus, you know, it's like, what is a shout chorus and why? Does, you know, boy, hasn't there been music written for centuries and in different cultures and nobody had a shout chorus? Why in jazz do we always have to have a goddamn shout chorus, you know? That's kind of how I feel, you know, sometimes when I hear large ensemble jazz music, you know? So, you know, if you think about music, just people, like I went to Brazil. You know that probably because I talked about that hang gliding piece, but I went to Brazil, and one of the powerful things in Brazil was that one of the powerful things in Brazil was that in Brazil, music feels just synonymous with life. Everybody makes music part of their life. Music isn't something you go to the conservatory for, that they have a building for, and that they get funding for.
Yeah.
Music is something that makes life tolerable, you know, that it's a valve for releasing and creating beauty out of something that's sometimes miserable or sometimes beautiful or whatever, but it's an expression that everybody uses. They don't know what bar lines are and what a 4-bar phrase is. They sing in a phrase that they feel. And all the other stuff of writing it down and analyzing it is just a means to kind of put that into place. But music is the most natural thing in the world. And sometimes I think in school we make it the most complex thing in the world, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. You know, to me, music should speak. Actually, it was Wayne Shorter. I met Wayne Shorter when I was in Brazil, and he said that Miles used to say he liked music that doesn't sound like music, and I was like, hallelujah, me too, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you impart that, some of your philosophies to other students? Is it possible to do that?
Well, I try to talk about it like that,
Yeah.
you know, and I try to just show them, you know, how I dance around and try to
Yeah.
figure my way into music, and then I go through technical things, modal things, and I sometimes I sit down and I show them the modes, and that if you take all the modes that come from the white keys on the piano, that is the mode meaning if you pick as ground zero one of the notes, like if you take the white keys and you go from C to C and you have C on the bottom, and then you move up from there, that you have a different proportion of whole steps and half steps than if you put an A on the bottom. And that proportion of whole steps and half steps in relationship to that bottom note changes the feeling of that, from sad to bright, or bright to dark, or happy, or however you want to talk about it. And the association with that is pretty universal. I think everybody would say that F to F on the white keys, Lydian, is the brightest. And if you move up a fifth from that and you go C to C, you have the major scale. That's still pretty bright. It's not quite as bright as Lydian. And if you go up a fifth from that, you get to something called Mixolydian. It has one note that's a little bit darker. It gets it's still happy because it's got that major third. And if you keep, so slowly the things get darker and darker, but there's a mathematical progression to it. If those notes keep moving up a fifth, there's one note in that mode that changes that goes down by a half step, and those go down by a fifth. And so I try to show that there is math behind all this beauty, just like if you look at a tree and you say, oh, that tree is so beautiful and it feels so good and it shades me or whatever. But if you go back into when that tree started growing, immediately in the growth of those branches, you can see the Fibonacci series. You know, the spiral's going the opposite way, and it's always in a progression of 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. And so to me, in the world, there's math behind the beauty. So if you can find beauty, chances are there's organization behind that. And then when you discover what that organization is, you can continue organizing to try to create more beauty. But it isn't just that math creates beauty. Beauty has math behind it. So I try to encourage students to look for something that just feels good, then try to find the logic in it, keep developing the logic, but you know, to kind of let their left and right brain work together so that it doesn't become too analytical. And never thinking, what do they think I should write? What's going to be hip? What should I adopt to be cool?
Yeah.
You know, but try to stay inside. So, you know, I always feel like the thing that makes each person unique is that, you know, you're you. Nobody on earth can imitate you. Nobody can be more you than you are. So your job is to become you to the deepest degree that you can, and that's where your beauty and that's where your mastery is in developing yourself. And I think so often in jazz it's really easy to look at other people and say, oh, he's a master, I have to try to be like that, I have to follow him. No, you have to find the depth of yourself and be disciplined and develop yourself to the same degree that those people were disciplined and developed themselves. And that's the thing that nobody can imitate. And that's where your strength, and that's where your gift is. That's what people want to see, is feel the uniqueness of each other. That's where you really communicate something fresh with somebody. It's hard to do that.
Marvelous. Wow. Give me a lot of food for thought here. Excellent. Is it, from a logistical standpoint, difficult to keep a band together these days?
Well, not really. You know what, I think it would be difficult, except that thankfully my whole group, there's a mutual respect in the group to me, to each other. Hopefully they feel that from me. And when you have that respect for each other, everybody's feeling respected by each other, and you want to be in that situation. So when we come together, there's immediately this good feeling, and everybody sits down to play. And because we played this gig for 5 years every Monday night in New York when Visiones was around, it's kind of like putting on an old glove, you know. It's been difficult for me just time-wise, you know, the logistics of the phone calls, the money, the contracts, being on top of it. And now I finally just got a manager, so that's going to be much better.
I heard that, and you got John Levy to be your manager.
Yeah. Who'd you hear that from?
Well, I heard it from Bob, I think. Bob Nowak.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I know John, because
you do?
Joe Williams actually helped us start this interview process.
Really?
Yes. And
Wow.
so John visited the college, and I actually got to interview John, and he is,
Really?
I'm pleased to hear that you've got an association with him.
I'm so excited about it. I'm just like so happy. I mean, I called them for a recommendation. I never in a million years thought he'd take me on. And I sat down with him and I said, you know, because then they wanted to meet, he and Deborah Hall, his wife, and so we were talking, and I said, you know, I showed him my whole schedule for the year. I said, well, I know this is peanuts. You know, he's worked with all the greats.
Yeah.
What I make financially and can bring to them is nothing, you know. So I said, I realize that, you know, this isn't much. And he said, no, no, no. He said, I only look at two things: if I can help somebody, and if I like them. And I could tell he really meant that, you know. And that was just so nice to hear, because I don't know how many. I think most managers are looking at, how much money is she making? Is it enough to really make it worth my while? Of course, I'm sure practically you have to do that.
Yeah.
But I'm sure a lot of his success through the years has been that must feel so great for the artists that work with him, to feel that that's what's behind his motivation, you know.
Right. Joe spoke very, very highly of him. You know, they had a relationship for so many years, and he said it was just on a handshake, and that they just... Actually,
we haven't even signed a contract yet. They started working with me. There's no contract now. I'm sure there will be. I don't care.
Right.
I never had a contract with my record company, really. After a while for my records, but we've had this other record out for months, and we haven't even done the publishing contract yet. It's just... But I like to work with people that I trust, and they trust me, and, you know.
Did you get any business of music courses along the way?
I did one course at Eastman, and it was good. But you don't really learn anything until you make mistakes for yourself, and I made a few this year. That's part of the reason I needed to get a manager.
Right.
So now, when you're first writing music, I mean, you dream of having a career and people asking you to do music, but when you're first writing and you're in school, you have so much time just to be creative, and you don't realize what a special thing that is to have nobody know what you're doing, and to have nobody care, because you can just be in your world and really bouncing things off yourself, and the people are playing it undistracted. Okay, so all of a sudden people, they like your music and they come to you, but that creates a whole nother problem. Suddenly you're distracted too with putting gigs together, and you don't have this time to just allow your music to develop and your ideas to fester or whatever they need to do, So, I mean, what I'm hoping is now that they're handling everything, I'm going to be more like I was when I was in school, and more like I was before I was busy, that I'll be home just thinking about music again. So
Excellent.
It's a blessing. Wow.
Wow. I wanted to ask you about a couple things, some quotes I picked up from you, which I thought were pretty interesting.
Hopefully they're real. Every once in a while I read one, then I say, I never said that.
You did that. You said one of the most difficult things in writing is discerning between a natural, spontaneous idea and what is habit or laziness.
Yeah, it's because sometimes you sit down and something just comes to you easily, and then you say to yourself, "Wow, is this something magical? Is it divine? Is it something my muse gave to me, or is this just the same old crap? And that's why it came easily to me, and I really need to search and push further." So sometimes I hum and haw over that a lot.
Right. I'm wondering if you've ever worked with synthesizers.
A little bit, not much.
Okay, because I think that what you just said sometimes applies to that, because if you get a beautiful reverb-drenched sound on a synthesizer, it can sound really...
Yeah, and you can fall in love with that sound.
But musically, there might not be too much behind it.
Yeah, I do all my writing just in front of score paper and then using a piano. I don't use synthesizers. Some people use it to really develop their ideas. I know Kenny Werner uses things, and he turns things upside down and tries all different combinations of things, and he writes beautiful music. And he said he comes up with things he would never come up with if he didn't have those tools, to try things backwards, and
Yeah.
And I can believe that, but for me it's a distraction, because I need to get, like I was saying before, kind of more to that meditative place. And if I'm pushing buttons and everything, forget it. It's gone.
Speaking of meditation, I think you also said that lately you've needed a lot more silence in your life. If you were living back in, was it Wyndham? And somehow you could still be writing and have a band, do you think the atmosphere of that town would affect your music differently from living in New York City?
Probably. I wouldn't want to do that.
You got out of there.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to do that because I really love being in the city. So what I mean by silence, actually I love the intensity of the city, and I love the feeling of going out my front door and there's 1,000 restaurants. I can walk down the street. I don't have to drive anywhere. Because living in a town like Wyndham for 18 years, I feel like you're kind of isolated. And I think I've had enough isolation. I'm not one of those people that dreams of living in a cabin somewhere. I would die. I love nature, don't get me wrong. I'm the first to want to go out with my bird book and binoculars or whatever, but for me, I enjoy living in the city. More what I mean by silence is not listening to music all the time. And I think, we're in just the first few decades of this situation where you can listen to anything in a second off the internet, and people send you a CD at the drop of the hat, or you get your email and somebody's sent you an MP3 file or whatever, something they've just written or they want you to hear, and it's just, I'm so inundated with music. I can't absorb anymore. People are, did you hear this? Did you check this out? Or I know about this recording from here, and then I had a bootleg of this, and I had a outtake of that, and it's like, I just wonder how people can listen to that much sound and still have space in their own head for their undiscovered sounds. And I think it's really unhealthy. it's just way, way, way too much. And I have a stack of really hundreds of CDs that I haven't gotten around to listening to yet. And I've gotten to the point where I just said, okay, I need silence. I can't listen to all this music. It's not my job. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's not your job. Wow. I'll shorten this one up, but it says love of music doesn't always manifest itself in the wish to make money as a musician. Having a monstrous career is not a marking stick for being successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a
heavy
lot
statement.
of great composers that weren't really discovered in their lifetime that much. You know, look at Charles Ives, or, you know, people who went a great portion of their life being really unrecognized, yet were strong in developing what they did. It didn't really change anything for them. I mean, easy to say because I've been lucky that way. But I have to say I didn't expect to have the career that I have. I actually didn't even set out to do it. I kind of expected, I honestly, people laugh and they think that I'm joking, but I honestly expected that maybe I'd have to be a waitress. I've been a waitress before. I was a truck stop waitress. That I'd be a music copyist maybe for a really long time, maybe forever. That maybe I'd have to do other things, and that I'd write and do my thing on the side on my own. So the fact that actually I got a little bit worried when I did start making my living, because I thought, oh my God, I'm going to get commissions and then I'm going to feel like I have to do this. And I always want to do what I'm doing because I want to. I don't, you know, if I decided I didn't want to write music, I doubt it would happen, but it could. That if I wanted to quit and just do something else, say I just suddenly got interested in something else creatively, I would just do that. In college, I almost switched majors to astrophysics.
Wow.
I thought I wasn't smart enough, but I took an astronomy course, physics and astronomy, and I was so interested in that, and I really came close to changing my major.
Wow. Do you have hobbies now that are provide some part away from music for you?
Yeah, interests. Some interests. I mean, I want to buy, now I've gotten all excited about astronomy again. I want to buy a telescope. I'm interested in Qigong and some kind of martial arts kind of things. You know, I like to read. I like to ride bike. For years I was really, I love dance. I love to go see dance. I'd like to take flamenco dancing. I haven't done it, but I'd like to. It's just a matter of being in town enough to do it, because I love flamenco music. And that's another thing that's maybe going to be the result of having a manager, is just taking more time to do those things. Because all those things, you know, when I was a child, I think this is the other thing that's powerful about when you're younger, and why I like to go back to the feeling of what it was when I made music as a child. Because when I was a child, music was very important, and nobody ever had to ask me to practice. I practiced constantly, and I loved to play. But everything that I did with the same degree of passion that I did music. When I ice skated, I was so passionate about that, you know, and I had the whole dress and the business, you know, and we did ice skating shows, and I remember the first time I saw Janet Lynn skate in a skating show, and she came towards me. I was sitting in like the third row, and when she came on the ice and came towards me, I was so excited that she was like flying all through the air. You know, I couldn't, it's like my vision just went nuts. And I looked to Janet Lynn in the same way, and the only other time that ever happened to me in my life was when I met Gil Evans. He came walking towards me, and I got so freaked out that my visual field, something must have optically started spazzing out behind my eye, because he was flying through the air and I couldn't catch him. And I was thinking, this is what happened to me exactly with seeing Janet Lynn skate, you know. But then so I loved her to the degree I loved Gil Evans, you know. And now, you know, I miss getting into things with the same degree of passion that I do music, because music isn't enough for me in life, you know. There's other things too. And I love music, but I think what I love about music is it's a valve for other things, you know. I love life, and I want more time to live, you know, and to me, music is one of the problems with musicians. I think they get so caught up in making records and going to the next project, and very often the person's first record is the most powerful, because that record represents years of just working on your own and doing other things in life, and then suddenly you become so busy doing your music, you aren't paying attention so much to the other things in your life because they aren't as important as the music. But what feeds the music? Music is fed by a deep and rich life. So I think it's really important to have other things in your life that you can do with equal, love.
Wow. You've said some wonderful things today.
Oh.
I was going to ask you, but you've almost kind of answered it, or what you envision for yourself. Because, by the way, I'd like to do this about every 5 years maybe and see where your career is at.
That would be interesting.
Yes.
That would be really interesting. Yeah. I'd even like to go back and look at them and say, oh, did she think she knew what was going on? Because sometimes I see that. I see things I said a long time ago, and I go, well, I changed my mind about that now.
I don't know, can you think ahead 5 years?
Not really.
Yeah.
Not really. I know I don't like to take commissions too far ahead, because I like to, because sometimes I like to think, wow, if I wanted to move to Rio in 2 years, I want to be able to do that. Like, for instance, I like having an apartment, because I like the idea, even though I've been there for several years now, I like the idea that if I just wanted to pick up and do something new, I could, that my life isn't so, stuck in some, physical thing that I can't just like move out of it. And the same is musically. I know a few things I'd love to do. I want to write more for dance. I have a wish someday to write for New York City Ballet, for this choreographer, Christopher Wheeldon, who I love. I think he's one of the great modern a combination of modern dance and classical ballet, and I really would like to write for him. I would like to collaborate more with people outside of the jazz world, maybe more in the pop world, or people from other countries, Milton Nascimento or something like that, Egberto Gismonti, or, different people from all over, Paco de Lucia, people whose music inspires me, so that when I bring my thing to it, they bring something new to me, that it's not just that I'm just keep developing in my own space, but that new influences come in, people that I just go, I have no idea what you're doing, but I want to learn about that, So I hope in 5 years, I'm not just doing the same thing. God, sometimes I think, you have to, if you set your goal, there's a book called, wait a minute, now let me think. It was by Margaret Mead's daughter. It's called Composing a Life. And the premise of the book is that there's kind of a difference between men and women, maybe. That men, more often, they set a goal, and that in their life, they pursue that goal, and anything that comes in and kind of pushes them off track a little bit to impede getting to that goal, they tend to push it away because they're maybe culturally, or who knows, they're kind of trained or oriented to fixing on a goal and achieving that. Whereas women, maybe by the nature of childbearing and their lives changing so drastically, or for whatever reason, she doesn't really know exactly, that women, and she cites 5 women's lives, how women tend to maybe set sort of a fuzzy goal, or maybe a strong goal, but often in their lives other things come in that take them to drastically new places, and and she talks about life as being an improvisation. And so sometimes I never expected really to be doing this, what I'm doing. I had no real idea, no set path. It just kind of happened. I studied with Brookmeyer. Brookmeyer introduced me to radio orchestra. Suddenly I ended up here. I met Gil Evans somehow. So I kind of like to leave things open, and I like to watch who comes into my life and go, oh, that's really cool. Okay, I'm going to take this detour, So I like to look this way, but with always like a little peripheral vision. I hope when I look back at my life, I just go, holy Moses, look at it, went here and here and here, and did I never expected I'd go here after this, I hope so.
All right. Well, we'll make a date for 5 years and see where we're at.
Cool.
And if you're in Rio, we'll come down there.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Oh, you'll
So-
want to. Have you been there?
I have not.
Oh, talk about life changing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's deep.
Well, this has really been very interesting.
Oh, good.
And you speak as well as your music comes out, I think. So.
Oh,
And
thanks.
congratulations on your Grammy
NAMI-
nomination.
my NAMI
NAMI
Gramination.
Gramination. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks a lot.
And you have a great band, and I'm
Yeah,
sure
I'm lucky in that respect.
yeah.
I am really lucky that, because people always ask that question about, is it hard to keep it together?
Mhm.
I'm lucky that it's not, because they're there for me,
Mm-hmm.
and they are in such a big way. They're so nice, We're kind of the mutual, it would make people nauseous if they heard,
Oh, yeah.
but like the mutual admiration, say, oh, you played so beautifully last night. Oh, Maria, you're this, you're this, no, but you're this, but that's so nice,
Yeah.
it's like a family,
Right.
and it's, I guess that's the way it has to be.
Mm.
If it wasn't that, if I ever got the feeling I was doing my music and people were there doing it because they kind of felt like they had to or didn't know how to say no or whatever, at that point, and it has come to that with a couple people, that I could feel that they were dissatisfied, and then, you just kind of gently say, you know what, move on, do your thing,
Right.
Everybody should do what they want to do, and I certainly don't want anybody ever sitting there playing my music because they feel like they have to or they need some money,
Right.
If they don't love doing it, I'll search for somebody, hopefully, that will, that's my wish, so. Okay,
Well, thanks
great
for your time.
questions, thank you.